咱平时看新闻，总觉得这个老美是真牛啊，全世界都得看他脸色，不管是谁上台啊，都是霸气侧漏。那咱有没有想过，美国他到底凭啥这么牛啊？就凭那11艘航母，还是那些飞来飞去的战斗机？要说起来啊，这个事儿还真有点反常识。咱们普通老百姓过日子啊，都知道一个道理，叫量入为出。你挣多少花多少，不能老是借钱过日子，对吧？这开公司做生意也是一个道理啊，你总得盈利吧？那国家也是一样啊，老是财政赤字、贸易逆差，欠一屁股债，那不就离衰退不远了吗？你看这个历史上啊，什么罗马帝国啦、大英帝国啦，一旦开始欠钱，那就离完蛋不远了。但是呢，怪事就出在美国身上了。这家伙从70年代开始就没怎么挣过钱，贸易上一直是入不敷出啊，也就是逆差，欠全世界的钱是越来越多。可是结果呢，他的霸主地位啊，不但没崩，反而越来越稳固，越来越厉害了。这就不对劲儿了呀，完全不符合常理呀。这里面到底藏着什么秘密武器呢？接下来咱们要看的这个视频啊，就是把这个事啊给咱们扒得明明白白的。视频的这位老哥啊，提出了一个特别有意思的观点。他说啊，美国手里面最厉害的武器根本就不是航母和导弹，而是美元。更准确的说啊，是美元对全世界的支付系统的垄断权。不过呢，这个躺着挣钱的好日子啊，现在好像也是遇到挑战了。要不为啥前有特朗普，后有拜登，一个比一个狠的要跟咱们中国搞各种竞争和限制呢？真的是为了那些摆在台面上的理由吗？这个视频就说了啊，真正让美国感到致命危险的，可能就是咱们每天都在用的微信支付，还有咱们国家正在推行的数字人民币。那这些新东西啊，正在悄悄地挖美元霸权的墙角。咱们话不多说，直接来看一下视频吧。
Go straight to that. Why is the United States hegemonic? Remember that after the Second World War, the United States came out of the war as the only creditor economy, except Switzerland, but that doesn't count, right? The only creditor economy, the only economy that was in a surplus. It had a trade surplus. It sold more stuff than it imported. Was the United States of America? Its factories were intact. They were not destroyed like across continental Europe or Japan. It wasn't bankrupt like this country was. And remember why you were bankrupt? Because you owed all this money to the Americans because they didn't give you a single bullet during the Second World War that they didn't charge you for and demand payment afterwards, which meant that post-war Britain was bankrupt. It was completely in a debtor's prison owned by the United States.
We call that debtor's prison the special relationship.
It's a special relationship, yes, indeed. We call the same thing. This is what's happening to Greece now. We are a debtor's prison, but we have a very special relationship with Brussels, of the same ilk as you do with the United States, or back then in 1945. Okay, so they came out of it with their factories having their productivity and production capacities being massively enhanced by the Second World War. By 1945, the United States industry was capable of producing 8 times more stuff than it was in 1941, Pearl Harbor, just before Pearl Harbor. 8 times more stuff. Huh? And they created, remember the Bretton Woods system? Some of you who are older will remember that the British pound was fixed, with a fixed exchange rate to the dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. All of us, the Greeks, the Germans, the French, the Italians, we had our own currencies, but it was a fixed exchange rate with a dollar. Essentially, we had a dollar. There were capital controls. We couldn't convert as much of our currency as we wanted to the dollar, but it was a fixed exchange rate. It was essentially a currency union. We were in the dollar zone between 1944 and 1971, when Richard Nixon destroyed the Bretton Woods system that the Americans had created. He destroyed it because the whole point about the Bretton Woods system was that it was a managed international dollar system predicated upon, based upon the American trade surplus. By the late 60s there was no... So here we have a hegemonic power in 1970-71 that is now into the red. Now what happened to the British Empire when it went into the red? It collapsed. What happened to the Roman Empire? It collapsed. Every time a major power goes into the red, it starts fading. And the fall is very close. In the case of the United States, between 1971 and 2020, let's say, the beginning of the pandemic, its hegemony and power increased exponentially along with its trade deficit. It is the only power in the world that became stronger as a result of going deeper into a deficit. That has never happened before. How did they succeed in doing it? And this is your answer. By maintaining a strict monopoly on international payments. It was the only country in the history of the planet that had a currency which was in demand. People wanted the dollar, even if they didn't want to buy anything from the Americans. Because when you put petrol in your car, if you still have a petrol car, okay, even if it is a company owned by the Dutch, and it buys oil drilled in, let's say, Nigeria, from a Nigerian company, and there's no American involved at all. Every time, because it's denominated in dollars, every time you fill up your petrol tank, you are demanding dollars. You have to convert pounds or yen or euros into dollars. So the ownership of the international payment system is what allows the United States, much more so than the ubiquitous US Army, Navy and Air Force, to maintain its hegemony. Kissinger knew that. I mentioned that in the book. In 1970, he asked his people around him. Kissinger back then was National Security Council. He was a national security advisor to Nixon before he became foreign secretary. And he said to them, how are we going to maintain our hegemony if we are in the red? And the answer he got was, we'll make other people, other capitalists from the rest of the world, pay for our deficits. This is what has been happening. But why is it that they can do that? Because they have the monopoly of the payment system internationally. What WeChat does, it threatens that monopoly. Remember the story with the German manufacturer? He's out of the dollar system. And with the war in Ukraine, something remarkable happened, because WeChat, on the one hand, and the Central Bank of China, having created a digital currency, its own publicly owned app that allows you to make free payments in renminbi, in the Chinese currency. So there are two things you can use to make international payments for free as a foreigner, as a Briton. You don't have to be Chinese. You have two. You have WeChat and you have the digital currency of the Central Bank of China. There are, as we speak, 210 million accounts of the digital currency. And business people can use it around the world to make free payments without bypassing the dollar system. That is a clear and present mortal danger for American hegemony. The reason why Donald Trump started the Cold War against China, this is my theory in the book. Why did he start attacking Huawei and then ZTE? And then you may say, of course, but Donald Trump is a madman. He would attack anyone just for the sake of it. Well, Joe Biden comes in as the anti-Trump president of the United States. And what does he do with the Cold War that Trump had started? Does he claw back? Does he retreat from it? No, he turbocharges it. He comes out with a declaration in the fall of 2021, essentially sending the message to China, we are going to stop you from becoming an advanced economy by banning all sales of advanced microchips, which is essentially, it's like in 1800 banning steam engines, the export of steam engines to Germany. This is like saying, we are declaring economic warfare against you. And why does he do that? The argument that it's because of Taiwan is rubbish. Nothing has changed about Taiwan. The one China policy had always been accepted by the West since Nixon went to Beijing. So it's not that. It's not that China is building up its army or its navy. I will believe that only when I see Chinese destroyers and frigates outside Los Angeles. For the time being, all I see is American warships outside Shanghai. So none of that makes sense. What makes sense is that the Chinese payment systems, which brings together Chinese finance and Chinese cloud capital in a most effective way, just visit WeChat and you'll see what I mean, is a mortal danger for the monopoly of the dollar. The war in Ukraine did something quite interesting. This superhighway of all singing, all dancing, digital payments, Chinese payments, the WeChat and the digital currency of the Central Bank of China, that was already there. But it's like building a superhighway, imagine 5 lanes on each side and a big, spanking new, beautiful highway with no cars on it. Because if you were a capitalist, even if you were a Chinese capitalist, you still wanted to use the dollar. Because if you produce aluminium in Shenzhen, you want to sell most of it to the Americans. So you want to sell it for dollars. And then you take your dollars and you take it to Wall Street and you buy American bonds and you buy real estate in Miami and so on. So the Chinese capitalists didn't even want to use this super highway of payments. But the moment the United States, together with the European Union, confiscated $450 billion worth of Russian money, I'm not judging this. I'm not saying they should have done it or not have done it. I'm simply saying they did it. So imagine you are a Saudi Arabian sheikh, or the emir of some emirate, or some Indonesian bigwig, or Malaysian, and you think, oh my God, they confiscated 450 billion smackers because they didn't like their policies. Well, they may not like me tomorrow, because I'm not the best guy in the world. They know that, right? Well, maybe I should hedge my bets, not put all my money in the dollar system. I will put most of my money in the dollar system, but I will put some in the Chinese superhighway. The Americans see that. The smart people in Washington see this as a serious threat. Because if they lose the monopoly of the dollar system, of the payment system internationally, that's it. The United States is finished. They're deeply in the red. They have a huge budget deficit and a huge trade deficit, which they manage to turn into a strength only as long as the Chinese do not touch their monopoly. Chinese big tech does.